episode of Dark Nature, the channel where we reveal the mysteries and curiosities of planet Earth. Sometimes, the most serene beauty is just a mask for a killer that needs no hands to strike. Look at this landscape. The camera flies low over the volcanic mountain range of Cameroon, where the green is so intense it seems to hurt the eyes, a mantle of virgin jungle hiding millinery scars. Between the low clouds, a deep blue water mirror appears, encased in a perfect crater. This is Lake Nyos. If we go back in geological time, we discover that centuries ago, the earth tore open. The boiling magma did not reach the surface, but it left a poison gift, a gas chamber trapped in the bowels of the lake. The water here does not mix. It is a stratified system where the bottom accumulates secrets that the surface ignores. The silence on the shores is absolute, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the giant ferns. But the danger was not just a theory. Let's place ourselves in the year 1984. Just a few kilometers away, at Lake Monoun, a dress rehearsal of horror occurred. 37 people dropped dead without explanation. There were no wounds, no blood, no screams. Witnesses spoke of a white cloud that rose out of nowhere. It was the first warning that the lakes in the region were loaded like firearms. Despite the Monoun tragedy, life around Nyos went on. Local tribal farmers tended their cattle, unaware that beneath their feet, the pressure at the bottom of the lake was reaching a breaking point. Carbon dioxide was dissolving in the water like a giant soda bottle that someone had been shaking for centuries. We arrive at the evening of August 21, 1986. The day was strangely hot. The sun began to hide behind the crater walls, bathing the water in shades of orange. A dull thud, like underground thunder, lightly shook the ground. The birds stopped singing all at once, and the air became heavy, charged with a static electricity that made skin crawl. At 9 o'clock at night, disaster broke loose. A column of water and foam nearly 100 meters high rose into the sky. The lake had burped. It wasn't lava, it wasn't fire. It was an invisible tide of 1,600,000 tons of carbon dioxide overflowing over the crater rims. The killer had been released, and it had no shape. The cloud, denser than air, began to descend the slopes at 50 kilometers per hour. It was an invisible blanket displacing oxygen. In the huts of nearby villages, oil lamps suddenly went out. People woke up confused, trying to inhale air that no longer existed. It is the sound of absolute silence before the final breath. In the village of Nyos, cattle dropped dead. Flies fell from the air. The gas filled every corner, every crack. There was no escape because there was nothing to see. Lungs burned, but the brain shut down quickly. It was a mass execution. Think of the real case of Joseph Nkwain. He woke up surrounded by corpses, not understanding why he was still alive while his children slept the eternal sleep. The gas continued its advance through the valleys, covering a radius of 25 kilometers. In its path, it extinguished life in 3 main villages, Nyos, Cam, and Subum. The darkness of night hid the magnitude of the tragedy. Thousands of people lay in their beds, with faces that showed no struggle, only a disturbing peace. Nature had reclaimed its space in the cruelest way imaginable. Dawn breaks on August 22, 1986. The sun rises, but the lake is no longer blue. Now it is a rusty red color, as if it had bled during the night due to the agitation of iron from the bottom. The silence is absolute. No roosters crowing, no voices. The few survivors walk like ghosts among the bodies of their neighbors, wondering if the end of the world has arrived. Is it possible that the earth itself decides who shall live and who shall die in the blink of an eye? The first rescuers to arrive at the valley on the morning of August 22, 1986, thought they had entered a dimension where life had simply been deleted. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no smell of decay. Thousands of people lay exactly where they were when the clock struck 9 the night before. Some were still holding their coffee cups, others were curled up in their blankets. The only thing out of place was the silence, a silence so thick it felt heavy in the lungs of the living. Word of the tragedy reached the capital, Yaoundé, and soon the world. By the time the first helicopters landed, the lake had completely transformed. The deep, crystalline blue was gone, replaced by a murky, blood-red surface. It looked as if the earth itself was hemorrhaging. International teams of volcanologists and geologists from the United States, France, and Japan rushed to the site, wearing gas masks and carrying sensors, terrified that the demon in the water might strike again at any moment. The scientific investigation was a descent into the unknown. Initially, some feared a chemical weapon attack or a secret volcanic eruption. But there was no ash, and the trees weren't burned. In fact, the vegetation was perfectly intact. One of the most chilling sights for the scientists was the line of death, a visible mark on the hillsides where the gas had reached. Below that line, every insect, bird, and human was dead. Above it, life continued as if nothing had happened. As the days passed in August 1986, the survivors began to tell stories that sounded like folklore but were cold, hard reality. They spoke of a rotten egg smell or a sudden warmth before losing consciousness. Scientists realized that while carbon dioxide is odorless, the high concentration had caused sensory hallucinations. The Red Lake mystery was finally solved. The violent upheaval of the water had brought iron-rich minerals from the bottom to the surface, where they oxidized instantly upon hitting the air. The lake hadn't just killed, it had changed its very soul. The experts eventually reached a terrifying conclusion. This wasn't a volcanic eruption in the traditional sense. It was a limnic eruption, a rare phenomenon where a lake suddenly releases a massive cloud of dissolved gas. Lake Nyos was a pressurized bomb. Even more haunting was the realization that the bomb was still ticking. The gas was still being fed by the magma chambers miles below, and the pressure was already beginning to build up again. By the end of the month, the villages were ghost towns. The government of Cameroon declared the area a no-go zone, forcing the few survivors to leave their ancestral lands forever. They left behind their homes, their history, and the bodies of over 1,700 people. As the scientists packed their gear, they looked back at the red water and realized that the catastrophe of 1986 was just a single breath from a monster that lived in the depths. If a lake can turn into a silent executioner once, what is stopping it from doing so again while the world isn't looking? The tragedy of 1986 sent a shockwave through the global scientific community. It wasn't just about Cameroon anymore. Geologists began to look at other deep lakes around the world with new eyes, eyes filled with suspicion. The term "killer lake" was no longer a headline for a tabloid, it was a formal scientific classification. Panic began to spread as researchers identified another lake, Lake Kivu, located between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Kivu was 2,000 times larger than Nyos and sat in a much more populated area. If Nyos was a grenade, Kivu was a nuclear warhead. Back at Lake Nyos, the situation remained critical. By the year 1990, the levels of carbon dioxide at the bottom of the lake were rising at an alarming rate. The bottle was being shaken again by the Earth's internal heat. Scientists knew that another landslide or even a small earthquake could trigger a second, even more lethal eruption. They were in a race against time, but how do you disarm a lake? The world watched as a group of engineers proposed a plan that sounded like science fiction. They were going to put a straw into the heart of the monster. In January 1995, the first experimental pipes were lowered into the depths. The idea was simple but incredibly dangerous. If they could create a controlled release of the gas, the pressure would drop. But there was a catch. If they disturbed the layers of water too quickly, they could accidentally trigger the very explosion they were trying to prevent. The tension on the research platform was suffocating. Engineers worked in silence, listening to the creaking of the metal cables as they descended hundreds of meters into the dark, acidic water. The moment of truth arrived in February 1995. They opened the valves. Suddenly, a massive geyser of water and gas erupted into the air, reaching a height of 50 meters. It wasn't a disaster, it was a fountain of life. For the first time in history, humans were bleeding a volcano. The self-siphoning system worked perfectly, fueled by the gas's own pressure. However, the victory was bittersweet. They realized that with only one pipe, it would take decades to make the lake safe. The monster was being drained, but it was still breathing. As the years passed into the new millennium, specifically in 2001, more permanent pipes were installed. The sight was surreal, a beautiful, quiet lake in the middle of Africa, with giant artificial geysers constantly spraying mist into the air. It was a monument to human ingenuity, but also a constant reminder of our vulnerability. The survivors, still living in resettlement camps, looked at the distant spray with a mixture of hope and terror. They asked the same question every night: is a pipe enough to stop the wrath of the earth? By 2011, the degassing process was finally showing significant results. The risk of another mass eruption had dropped by 80%. But just as the world began to breathe a sigh of relief, nature threw another curveball. The natural dam at the end of the lake, a wall of volcanic rock that held back millions of tons of water, was found to be crumbling. If that wall failed, a massive flood would drown the valleys below, and the sudden drop in pressure could trigger one last, apocalyptic gas release. We had spent decades trying to stop the gas, only to realize the very walls of the crater were now ready to betray us. The year 2014 marked a turning point in the struggle between man and the abyss. After nearly 3 decades of fear, the degassing project reached its peak. The once deadly concentrations of carbon dioxide at the bottom of Lake Nyos had been reduced to levels not seen since before the tragedy. But the Red Lake had one final lesson for us. Even as the gas faded, the crumbling natural dam remained a threat. Engineers had to race against the clock once more, reinforcing the volcanic wall with massive concrete pillars to prevent a catastrophic flood that would have wiped out life in the valleys all over again. By 2021, a miracle occurred. The government officially declared that it was safe for the people to return. For the survivors who had spent half their lives in exile, the homecoming was bittersweet. They returned to find their ancestral homes swallowed by the jungle, their farms reclaimed by the wild. Walking through the ruins of Nyos village, the silence was no longer the heavy, suffocating weight of the gas, but the peaceful quiet of a graveyard that had finally found rest. They rebuilt their huts, but they never looked at the water the same way again. Today, Lake Nyos has returned to its hauntingly beautiful blue state. To a tourist, it looks like a paradise, a hidden gem in the heart of Africa. But look closer. You will see the pipes still standing in the center of the lake, like silent sentinels guarding a sleeping dragon. Scientists still visit every month, checking sensors and monitoring the Earth's pulse. They know that nature doesn't follow our laws, it only grants us a temporary truce. The magma deep below is still pumping gas, and the cycle of the Earth continues, indifferent to our presence. The story of Lake Nyos is more than a tragedy, it is a reminder of our place on this planet. We live on the thin crust of a world that is still cooling, still shifting, and still breathing. The victims of August 1986 didn't die because of a storm or a fire, they died because the Earth simply exhaled. It is a humbling thought that beneath our feet, there are forces so vast and so silent that we might not even hear them coming until it is far too late. As the sun sets over the crater one more time, the water reflects the deep orange of the sky. Life has returned, but the memory of the breath of death is etched into the very stones of the valley. We have learned to listen to the lakes, to watch the mists, and to respect the dark power that hides beneath the surface of our world. Can we ever truly say we have conquered nature, or are we just living in the pauses between its breaths? If this journey into the depths of Lake Nyos has fascinated you, don't forget to subscribe to Dark Nature and hit the like button. Your support allows us to keep exploring the most shadowed corners of our planet. Also, check out our previous video on the mysteries of the Sentinelese in India, another place where nature and isolation hide secrets we are still trying to understand. Leave a comment below, do you think there are other silent killers waiting to wake up beneath our feet? Thank you for being part of this community. I'm your narrator, and this has been another journey into the unknown. See you in the next episode of Dark Nature.